We begin with President Donald Trump's immigration agenda. It's being put to a major Supreme Court test. Opening statements in Trump versus Barbara were heard on April the 1st. It's a case that has the potential to transform the nature of Florida's culture and economy. It stems from an executive order the president signed on Inauguration Day last year. The president's executive order, blocked by lower courts since last year, directs federal agencies not to issue or accept documents recognizing U.S. citizenship to children whose parents are in the country unlawfully or temporarily. That includes the visa waiver program, student and work visas. The core question: does this executive order violate the Birthright Citizenship Clause of the Constitution's 14th Amendment? It's the phrase in the middle, 6 words, the administration is asking justices to interpret. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. Trump's Solicitor General is arguing that the phrase, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, renders the Citizenship Clause applicable only to persons completely subject to the U.S. political jurisdiction. A child, they argue, is not. A child's ties are with the parents, who presumably will return to their home country once their temporary status ends. That, according to the Solicitor General. Where the child's parent is in the country illegally, they argue the parent cannot establish the requisite allegiance to the U.S. while simultaneously violating its law. The Supreme Court case, originating in New Hampshire, has major implications for Florida. More than 1,600 Cubans were repatriated in Florida last year. Once immune to immigration enforcement, even when undocumented, Cuban immigrants are now in legal limbo, with all pending naturalization, residency, and asylum applications on hold by Homeland Security. Florida's Venezuelan population also bracing for a potential second hit. Last year, the Supreme Court upheld the Trump administration's termination of their temporary protected status, also known as TPS. It's a deportation protection and work permits that Venezuelans have had since 2021. According to the Congressional Research Service, Florida has more than 225,000 Venezuelan TPS holders. Another group impacted are the so-called Dreamers. These are undocumented immigrants who arrived in the U.S. prior to 2007 when they were children. Raised and educated here under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, 19 years later, they are adults, and most have kids of their own, born in the U.S. Across all immigrant groups equally, where households have mixed immigration status, the fear of family separation is rising. The prospect of losing birthright citizenship for their children born in the U.S. is weighing in the balance. And Tara, as the constitutional expert here, I'd like to start with you. How will the justices proceed in this very high-profile case?
I think they need to tread very carefully. Remember, this is a court that is steeped in originalism, strict constructionism, and the origin story of the 14th Amendment is really important. It was post-Reconstruction, post-Civil War, part of the cachet of the Civil Rights Amendments, the 13th Prohibition Against Slavery, 14th Birthright Citizenship, Equal Protection Clause and Due Process, and then, of course, the 15th Amendment empowering black men the right to vote. The origin story of the 14th Amendment is supposed to be guiding this originalist SCOTUS. They have to tread lightly, though, because there has been a long-standing tradition that we interpret the 14th Amendment, those first few words, to say, if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen. It was only a few decades after the 14th Amendment's ratification that this same conflict was tested. We know that case to be Kim Wong-Ark. Very similar circumstances to what is before the court right now, and the court 6-2 said, hey, listen, we are going to look at the original meaning of the Constitution to say if you're born in the United States, you are a United States citizen. That was actually codified by Congress decades later, and so there's this understanding that this is what it means. This is the real problem for the Supreme Court. This is a fringe idea. put forward by a gentleman named John Eastman. And if you remember who John Eastman, he was the lawyer that represented Donald Trump during the insurrection, and he actually floated this with Bill Barr, the Attorney General at the time of Donald Trump's first administration, and it was swatted down as completely unreasonable and unconstitutional. And this seems like because John Eastman, in this fringe idea of embracing a different understanding of the 14th Amendment, he never got paid for his work for Donald Trump. Maybe this is his payback to have it go all the way up with the Solicitor General in front of SCOTUS. But if SCOTUS necessarily decides this way, it has grave consequences for a voting electorate that has in the last election voted Republican.
Travis, I'd like to ask you your opinion. I mean, in the precedent case that goes back to 1898 in the U.S. versus Wong Kim Ark, that child was born to Chinese parents, but those parents, according to the case work, they were permanent domicile and residence. They were foreign nationals, but they were in the country and they were permanent residents. Is that something?
What they were calling sojourners. You know, this is such a fascinating case, and there's so much political to it. We were going back and forth in the green room having a vigorous conversation about it. It was not all of it for the air, right? But I'll tell you, it's really interesting. I was fascinated. I listened to the entire argument. Trump has made very much a political play on this, and he actually, of course, he went to the Supreme Court, unlike any president ever before.
First sitting president.
I'm not sure that's going to
arguments in the Supreme Court.
I'm not sure that's a great idea. I'm not sure that he's going to look back on it and think it necessarily was a great idea. The court could take this as an opportunity to push back and say that that Article 1 doesn't have the power to do that, and I think, of course, that's what the assertion was that led up to this, which that he could, do an executive order. I was really disappointed that they didn't take an opportunity to maybe make a broader sweeping argument on a national security basis. We've got Chinese Communist Party members who supposedly fly their kids here, Russian oligarchs flying their baby mamas here to Miami to have babies. It's all this conversation, and I thought the implication was originally when he issued the order was it was a national security problem, right, or could be. And I could see where the framers, the original framers of the Constitution, wouldn't have envisioned that given modern technology and travel. Certainly still wasn't envisioned when they enacted the 14th Amendment.
But that's some of the problem with an originalist perspective, and we can't unpack the different judicial philosophies. Right. But of course, women, men without property, black people were not intended in the original jurisdiction of the Constitution. Of course, the 14th Amendment tried to change that with the Equal Protection Clause. But listen,
you seem to be the originalist here.
I got to tell you,
one
of the interesting things that Travis brings up is that this politically has a whole nother meaning, and I think that we both agree on that. The outcome of this isn't just legal and will be dire consequences for many Americans, not just the 2.5 million in Florida, but it will also set up precedent. And whether or not the court can actually look at the language and the outcomes and make peace with that is something that we're really watching to see.
Well, as president of the Democratic Hispanic Caucus, I deal with these people every day. So
who do you mean? Who's these people?
Well, the people who are on these, and the TPS people, the Venezuelan people, even Cubans that have been
immigrants impacted by this change.
Exactly, and there are people at all different levels of immigration status. Cubans that have been here for 20, 30 years and never gotten their papers. They're dragging Abuela out of the closet and taking her back to Cuba. Where are your papers? I don't have any, so bye-bye. And there's a lot of people who thought they were safe that are not. And people in the Hispanic community, that I deal with every day, day in and day out throughout this whole area, they're just scared to death because
this is a sophisticated crowd. Lawyers and people who've been in politics for a long, long time observing this. I was watching or listening to the proceedings today and thinking of it as, what does a layperson think? And I thought to myself, they must hate lawyers. They must really hate lawyers.
Oh, geez.
If they're listening to these cases.
Can I just put something?
Lay people never know. What I'm saying is they never envisioned a day where someone would just maybe swim across the river, pop out a baby, and all of a sudden they're a citizen.
Afford people dignity, first off. Afford people dignity. That's not exactly what they do.
Over this. So Eastman, I think, lost his law license for the stupid argument. Secondly, it's for 250 years, you don't have to be a brain surgeon to figure it out. It says if you're born in the USA, you're a citizen. You can finagle it all the way.
The Declaration of Independence is based on natural law. Right. Some people believe the right of migration is a natural right. Of course, most countries decide that they shouldn't have open immigration, but that's what the 14th Amendment says. If you're born here, so be it. I think most people that are watching are really wondering why the heck our president is going all the way to SCOTUS, Supreme Court, with something that's settled law. Right. The Supreme Court is supposed to be a stabilizing agent of our country. We have 50 states, 94 district courts, 13 court of appeals. This is going to be upsetting the entire apple cart for this entire judicial system. So I think most people are wondering, how did we get here? Why did we get
it
here?
would be making
It's
new law.
certainly something
It
that
would be.
we will all be following, and we do expect the Supreme Court to issue their ruling by early July. So we will all follow that.